Turns out he's a major cinephile. They don't watch enough movies! It's a very simple formula! And here we go. Hello all, welcome to the 30th episode of Season 2 of Nick Nat Goes to the Movies. Hopefully you're enjoying the new Monday release schedule for these episodes, and in case it's still a little bit jarring, let's get back to a topic y'all are all too familiar with. If you are a new listener, welcome, and if not, you know I tend to make a fair amount of episodes around both horror and superhero things. Well, with the latest DCEU movie dropping both in theaters and on HBO Max on August 5th, I knew what had to be done. I am of course referring to the soft reboot sequel, The Suicide Squad, not to be confused with Suicide Squad, directed by James Gunn with a whole new plethora of cast members joining and a few series vets. The franchise started to excite people on July 11th, 2015 during Comic-Con. A dark and eerie trailer came out and set in the still young DCEU with a ton of brand name characters and actors and a haunting rendition of I Started a Joke from Confidential MX and Becky Hansen. I don't need to tell you how excited I was for this movie when this came out. You can probably feel that vibe coming off my vocal cords and into your ear holes. I still to this day think of that trailer along with the Dead Island trailer from 2011. Both are hauntingly beautiful, and superhero things getting dark like that and emotional is what I'm all about. Same with that zombie video game. If you haven't seen either, please do. And you also know that from those two trailers, they had not a whole lot to do with the final end product. So I'm going to talk about both films in this loosely defined franchise. I'm of course going to bring up everything else around the 2016 version, including what could and hopefully will be with the Ayer cut. And while I have a high opinion of the 2021 film, I would never hate on something because of a mostly unrelated thing. I will bring up some Ayer cut things as we kick things off with Suicide Squad. So before we get too far into the cast list for this first movie, did anyone else remember David Harbour was in this movie for like a hot second as generic suited government guy? I genuinely heard that voice and thought it was Josh Stamberg, almost the exact same WandaVision character in David Hayward. But brief fun fact. So the main squad in the first outing is Will Smith, Margot Robbie, Viola Davis, Joel Kinnaman, Jai Courtney, Jay Hernandez, Cara Delevingne. Sadly, with underdeveloped nature, it's tough to call Jared Leto, Adewale Akinoi Agbaje, Karen Fukuhara, and Adam Beach anything more than support at best. The common cameo was fun. Probably one of the best parts overall when you think of this movie has to be those few deeper DCEU ties with Ben Affleck and Ezra Miller appearances. And before we get too deep into the woods, know that while this is available on HBO Max, I'm watching my home cut. That's the extended version. Yes, it's not the full Ayer cut, but it has a bit more, so I will take what I can get until that comes out. So let's start with what we have and then reflect on what could have been. I mean, I'll try to at least. I know we're all aware Ike Barinholtz is in this. Sometimes I like his role in this movie. Sometimes I really wish to see what his role would have looked like in the darker version. If nothing else, I love the Batman-Superman nods. It kind of put this movie in a place of what else has happened in the DCU, coming right after Batman vs. Superman. It really seeds things into the shared universe, but the crazy jumping of pop culture songs so quick into the first 10-15 minutes is crazy jarring. And in the same way that movie intros characters flashing through the mall in quick succession with no true story briefings overall. The scenes looked good, especially the Deadshot, Harley Quinn, and Captain Boomerang moments, but between the music and the quick edits put in, the tone loss is startling. Like, you can see the good in there, but you can see all that was put on and around this movie to make it try and rival Deadpool, which was going to be a tall order no matter what. And, it's not its own tale that David Ayer wanted to make. I personally am a big fan of the costumes, especially seeing Will Smith in the full Deadshot outfit, mask and all. Arguably one of my favorite characters in the DC. I know the roles were brief in the Justice League animated series, voiced by Michael Rosenbaum. Smallville fans will recognize that actor. And I think early Arrow did a really strong job with both his character, played by Michael Rowe, as well as Deathstroke, played to perfection by Manu Bennett. Hopefully we can eventually get the DCEU version, played by Joe Manganiello, to go toe-to-toe with Batfleck. Speaking of Batman, played by Ben Affleck, his inclusion in 2 of the 3 intro scenes make them the best. Really the best. Seeing Batman take on baddies in Gotham is something I've always wanted in the DCEU, and these little teases of him against both Deadshot and Harley Quinn, even a small part with him going toe-to-toe against the Joker, that's what we need more of. I mean, I know we've talked a lot about the badness of the Justice League version, but I always like that brief part in the beginning with Batman fighting a criminal in Gotham, just doing some Gotham stuff. I feel like that was a missed opportunity, the only thing I liked of the Justice Cut stuff. Also, to editing forced onto this movie, the neon lights, sped up scenes, and blur effects, video editor me just thinks these are exhausting and annoying. While this Jared Leto Joker may not be everyone's cup of tea, I can see the good and bad in all of the Jokers we have seen in media. And I like the darker, messed up version of the character. And while we got some stuff loaded in the front, the biggest complaint, even in the extended cut, which I had hoped would have so much more Joker, especially with all the marketing material around him, unfortunately this was still super light on this version of the Clown Prince. I mean, it's an abomination to put so much, this is the Joker, he's going to be a big part, he's the main 3 actors on the front of the movie when you click on HBO Max. It's unfortunate and almost unapologetically brutal that he's just barely a part of this movie. But no matter what you can say bad of this, there's no doubt that Margot Robbie is an amazing part of this movie overall, and her take on the character is just as strong as Tara Strong was in the animated Batman universe, which y'all will know with all that I've talked about. The last movie I saw in theaters before COVID lockdown was the spiritual successor to this movie in the solo outing of Harley Quinn. While Jai Courtney is still on the younger side of acting and roles he's been in, you may know him from Spartacus or some of the Divergent movies. I too appreciate him in this movie. Thankfully he exists in the sequel as well for a little bit of time. His character is another one I like overall, even if he will always be a bit goofy. Even in the animated Justice League stuff, his portrayal is on that goofier side, very comic accurate. But his super brief Arrowverse role, also played by another Spartacus alum in Nick E. Tarabay, made the character both cool and maybe he was a threat and some cause of danger. Also, while the chances of his role in the Flash movie seem a bit like a long stretch now, you never know with multiverses and all that fun that they're going to mess around with, I really enjoyed his, once again, brief intro, especially with Ezra Miller. Boomerang and the Flash are normally supposed to be pretty big villain, that's one of your big bads, and obviously we really never got that in the CW, and we probably aren't really going to get that in the DCEU as well. I always felt a bit iffy on Joel Kinnaman, especially after The Killing, and look, that was an AMC show that I liked for a season or 2, season 3 and 4, where they were doing one-off stories, just did not work at all. There's this, rumor that was floating around also around this movie that Tom Hardy was supposed to be Rick Flag and then Joel Kinnaman replaced him. I mean, that sounded perfect, but when you look at the full gist of the 2 movies, Kinnaman ended up doing some real cool things in the role, and he was, brought back for the sequel, one of the 4 that made it through both movies. And let's be real, Will Smith would have been if he could have, but did not happen. It's all fine. And while I talk on the special effects being a bit annoying at times, there's a part, and it's a brief part, I don't want to say it's all fully good, but when the Enchantress is kind of the lower tiered version, the spookier version, the form swap with a handhold flip, that does look super cool. Some of it's cool, but there's a lot of the Enchantress stuff specifically that is the opposite of cool. While we only get brief Deadshot daughter moments in this movie, there are nice, when they exist. Something you can tell they wanted to keep in the 2021 film, giving the spiritual successor character in Elba's Bloodsport a daughter along the way. The relationship is super different, but the threads are still there. Thankfully, there is always a chance for Smith's Deadshot to come back into the DCEU, or maybe the future of the Suicide Squad franchise. That's probably the biggest mystery after watching the 2021 film. It's not clear what the next step is. When you have been away from a movie for a while, You either remember how much you love it, you realize how bad it is looking back, or you really notice the bad parts if it's not awful. Look, no matter how many times I watched the first Harry Potter, Matrix, or Fellowship of the Rings, extended cut of course, I remember how much I love these movies. And when I watched Avengers Age of Ultron, as y'all know from my MCU Deep Dive Part 2, no way did it bug me as much watching it in theaters in Berea, Ohio. The first movie I got to watch solo. I kind of had to amp myself up to get to that. Now I'm a pro at going to movies by myself. But watching in 2021, there were some notable issues in that movie, especially in the writing. And I feel like that's true here as well. And while I remember the emotional highs and lows with the trailer tone, I remember not being so put off by the movie when seeing it. But in 2021, rewatching this, the music, the jokes, and the deeper Enchantress story are not it, unfortunately. There is for sure some bad here, but you can see the good groundwork that exists. That is why I really do think the Ayer cut would be a better package for all parties. I mean, the Snyder cut was vastly superior in every way to the Justice League we got at first, even if the aspect ratio is a little bit funky. That movie has some same scenes, but, this version from HBO Max and Zack Snyder was so much better. And gosh, the Ayer cut and everything it could have been that we will get into, later, it sounds like it would sure be it. If Margot Robbie is the best part of this movie, we got so far. The next best thing has to be Viola Davis's Amanda Waller. We've gotten some strong versions of this character, in the Justice League animated universe and era, but Viola Davis is hands down the best around. So I'm talking mostly strong things about 2016 Suicide Squad, but the cracks and flaws are here. But gosh darn, how great does, more character development, linear narrative structure, more Joker, and a darker tone sound? And how about ties to Steppenwolf, Boom Tubes, and Parademons as a precursor to the Justice League instead of a ton of eyeball black goo monsters? What could have been? I honestly wish the Joker stuff was more omnipresent. Every time I see his gang mob stuff, all his baddies with fun masks, the Batman mask especially reminds me of the fun parts with the Batman toy, Get Him Batman and Shazam. If there is something super bad, the worst kind of movie villain is a CGI monstrosity. There are a plethora of movies that have this problem. And by taking the Joker out of the importance in this cut, Incubus and Enchantress, and especially that final third of this movie, just truly suffers. I mean, take the two versions of Justice League and see how much worse the Steppenwolf CGI was from Joss Whedon and Zack Snyder. A CGI villain can do okay, but it really shouldn't be the only villain. While a ton of characters were done dirty, there's no worse disrespect than Katana existing and seemingly doing nothing through the entire movie. Like Killer Croc, they both exist and do little to nothing here, and they are not back for the sequel. Thankfully, Fukuhara has some real time to shine in the Amazon superhero commentary show, The Boys. But with having a cool Soul Taker sword that we never get to see and just her doing next to nothing outside of action scenes, there's a huge let-off. Her scene almost mirrors the brief intro to Hawkeye becoming Ronin in Avengers Endgame, but somehow even shorter, and instead it has Kenneth Choi, who will hopefully be back in the third of these Spider-Man movies this December. While I get the ploy of having to kill someone off early to prove the neck bombs are real, that's a classic Suicide Squad trope. With this in mind, I really wish they could have done a little bit more with Slipknot. Look, this version is almost 2 hours long, but I would happily take a longer, better, and darker 3-hour version. I don't need his full life story, just, I don't know, it felt like there was more character development in the same version of this scene in the 2021 version in less time than somehow this character was. I do wish this was an R-rated movie as well. Thankfully, this new one is R-rated and can have some serious carnage, but seeing some blown off heads early, I guess that's as good as we're going to get from a very far away distance. These rock and eyeball monsters are painful. Imagine how much cooler they would have been being parademons and having deeper DCEU ties. This army of garbage monsters is super annoying. And Jay Hernandez may have not gotten the most time to play here. He's mostly along for the ride. I guess the whole thought is right, dealing with personal demons, not wanting to be a part of it. I don't always get that vibe, especially with how the movie is mostly played out. But when we do finally get to see his powers, once again, they look cool. And the action looks cool. Things are cool overall, but gosh, there are things that are all muddled up and blended together in this movie. I feel like all these Harley Quinn flashback scenes probably have even more on the cutting room floor, and overall they probably exist in the same narrative linearly. And the random pop-up flashbacks, they're a bit jarring. In the same way that you forget about the pop music until the moment this movie sneaks its ugly head back in again. You know why Viola Davis is one of the best parts of this movie? Anything she does feels like it would be right at home with the darker tone we'd want. I mean, that and the Joker, like their crew when they're hijacking the helicopter, feels right at home as a part of that darker story. And gosh, those moments are very cool. This movie really could have pushed more Joker villain into the story and made him less of a minor annoyance as opposed to the CGI blah baddie. The last chunk of this movie is where things really get bad. I think like generic world destruction and strange sped up dancing is not the thing you should be doing to seem like a super bad character. I mean, it barely works on TikTok, am I right? I mean, what could have been putting the Joker in the final third and have some actual things that make sense? Not just showing up in the final 2 minutes to save Harley. Something that immediately doesn't matter in the Harley Quinn Birds of Prey movie, which also missed opportunity. Leno did not have to be in the main movie, but just a bit, even if that intro wasn't stupidly animated, instead had the real people in it. I mean, that would have helped and been huge for continuity and connective tissue, you know, like Marvel for the most part always keeps to if you take out Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the, as of now, not a part of it, Netflix MCU shows. We'll see what changes in the third Spider-Man and the Doctor Strange 2 films. I do think El Diablo gets a lot of time to shine. It just happens in the very end of the movie. But even this feels like a moment that we could have had better. He starts having a Dom Toretto family spout off, and it feels super unearned. Their development was not shown in this movie at all to really have this isolated character start prating on about an immediate attachment to his new pseudo-family. The development needs to be there, and in this cut, it was not. And in the Ayer cut, he apparently would have survived, which is also something I'm super curious about. I mean, I love his transformation to his big final form, which is honestly the best of the three characters who were given major CGI work. Like I said, missed opportunity overall. The witch battles were so much better when she was not like OP and instead just creepy and spooky and shrouded in shadows. That should have been all of it. Also, super missed opportunity to have the mind-controlled version of Katana attacking the rest of the squad. But why was this and everything taken out that we would have liked? Lastly, in the same vein as the larger DCU ties begin, brief but amazing, having a scene with Bruce Wayne and Amanda Waller where she knows he's Batman and him threatening vigilante justice, super good. And sadly, we most likely will never see this synergy again, knowing that the DCU is all but fractured with individual projects taking the center stage from team-up movies, with any future of the Snyder Cut in severe jeopardy and limbo. I was hoping that would spawn on the rest of the Snyderverse. We got the Snyder Cut. Ayer Cut's going to be tough. I just don't know if we can expect, and there's no world where we can probably assume that the Snyderverse will happen, but I can hope and hope and hope. So I guess I talked all about the Ayer Cut parts throughout. I wanted to mention for what could and would be better. I mean, this movie isn't awful, and I probably could rewatch it a bit more than, say, Age of Ultron, but they are pretty close to the same issues. The only big difference is a different version of this movie already exists that would probably fix a fair amount of these issues. It may not be perfect, but it would have fixed it. It could have been 3.5 stars, but for now, we have it at 2.5 on Letterboxd at best. But you've heard all you can on this movie, and I know all I want to do is have this Ayer Cut and talk about how great it is. What you really want besides that probably is to hear how the new movie stacks up. I did an old and new comparison last week with the Space Jam franchise. Let's see if the new school can top the old school this time around. So as you probably can tell, I don't hate the 2016 Suicide Squad that we got. And someone who really wants to see the Ayer Cut at some point, know that that's where I'm coming from. But all that being said, this movie was very, very good. Major spoilers ahead if you haven't watched yet. please do yourself a favor. Do that first and come on back. This movie is so much better without spoilers, but the trailers did kind of give you an idea of the main characters who would make it through most of the movie with the daytime and rain scenes. So this movie brought back Margot Robbie, Joel Kinnaman, Viola Davis, and Jai Courtney. I'm sure they would have loved to have gotten Will Smith back, but I am sure that will happen again at some point. I mean, I'm not so positive, but I'm really hopeful. Who knows? Maybe they can bring back other Suicide Squad members. I mean, the real hope would be you have rotating members killing off some and some coming back and forth. That's kind of the fun of it. And like we've said many a times, that was always the fun of the larger animated DC universe with the Justice League shows, Batman and Superman, Static Shock, Batman Beyond, and so forth. But the new big ads, like the list is amazing. We got Idris Elba in the pseudo Deadshot replacement role. John Cena! Da, 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 da. Like, those two were always billed to be, like, the big ads. But honestly, there were so many other actors who have varying degrees of plot importance. I was stoked for more Michael Rooker and Nathan Fillion. I was super intrigued by the voice acting Sylvester Stallone, and more from character actor David Dastmalchian, from both the Ant-Man franchise and a brief but memorable Dark Knight role. Flula Borg was so much fun in the press kit interviews leading up to the movie, and now we know why SNL vet Pete Davidson was not as involved. The surprising heart of this movie comes from a fairly new actor in Daniela Melchior as Ratcatcher 2, and we finally learned that Taika Waititi was playing Ratcatcher 1 instead of the voice of Starro. I mean, there is more than that, but that's a huge list just to start. For a 2-hour movie, where a lot of superhero movies go into the 3-hour range, this is a real crisp 2 hours that covers a lot and has a lot without feeling too long or short, or that there's a missing piece to it for the most part. While I had mixed reviews of the pop music in the first Suicide Squad, James Gunn, once again the person very known for blending music and movies with his Guardians franchise, he again finds this balance of these, and for sure succeeds compared to the Studio 2016 version. This movie pretty quickly takes us into these characters, mostly being terrible people, and throws us right into mission prep with a squad featuring all 3 veterans from the first squad and a bunch of randos, but with namestays like Fillion and, for me, Roker at least. You feel pretty good about this being a bit of a real squad. If you have seen this already, there's more than one reason this is reminiscent of Deadpool 2 and X-Force. It is funny that the movie that was changed to be more like Deadpool only marginally felt like it, but this movie, in the best possible way, feels closer to that, but it's still able to tell its own more horrid and disgustingly beautiful tale. While we get our intro to the fake A-Team, the fun personality bits of Pete Davidson dancing and playing with his guns are super fun. They gotta give him a bit of time after all. While I do not mind Waller eliminating all of her government drones in the first movie to show how cold and calculating she is, once again, Viola Davis is a treasure, especially to this franchise. It is fun to see her support staff have a bit more personality, and honestly, they all feel not as cold-blooded as she does, but they're closer to that, and it honestly kind of feels like that personality for a little bit of Cabin in the Woods vibes. Super underrated horror film that has a Hemsworth brother to boot. The writing is spectacular. All of the weird deadpan sarcasm is so snappy and fun for a ton of new characters that, spoiler alert, don't make it super far. And honestly, seeing this usual badass, squad assemble scene turn into one member immediately drowning, followed by Pete Davidson doing nothing but betraying his team and immediately getting his head blown off. The R rating does so much here, and the first one could have used that to boot as well. Look, I will always say The Walking Dead with an R rating or having the liberties of an HBO or Showtime show could have been even better than it was. I know that show ain't perfect, but I still really do enjoy it and can't wait to see how it all wraps up with the final season kicking off at the end of this month. This movie really does play with subverting expectations. Early on, we are led to thinking Roker is somewhat important. Heck, this movie kicks off with him and makes him seem like the smartest one in the room. But when shit hits the fan, no one is safe. And while we quickly lose a ton of characters, most get the chance to show off their skills before being killed off. But if there are a few innate things this movie does better than the 2016 one, is things that are paramount to the Suicide Squad. First, betrayal, from Blackguard to Waller and more along the way. The first movie was made to have this family angle. The Squad is not necessarily all that, and there should be some more underhanded stuff on display. They are all villains after all. And the second thing this movie does is kills off its characters. The first movie only killed off 2 of your main group, which is fine when one is underdeveloped and one may have been better served living. It's a super different tone. The Warzone storyline leads to some crazy violence. Seeing Pete Davidson lose his whole face. Seeing Boomerang actually cut some people up with his weapons instead of these eyeball monsters. Oh, it's beautiful. It's a fast-paced, frantic action. Now, we all kind of knew what TDK was, but seeing Nathan Fillion's power in action, being as stupid as we thought it was, you kind of know things are going to go off the rails. Mongal tried to take down a helicopter, ends up killing herself and Boomerang. Fillion's floating arms are like getting shot up in the air. Javelin doesn't even get a chance to throw the javelin once. And Savant, the calm, cool, collected one, tries to flee and has Waller blow his brains out. Like I said, someone always has to get their brains blown out to show that the devices are a real thing. We are left assuming Harley and Flag are captured, and this mission was like a super failure, but brutal and hilarious to watch this all lead to a opening credit crawl with a nice tour of the carnage of the battlefield. But if there is one thing that kind of bugs me about this movie, is all the text pseudo-existing in the world via smoke or blood or fire or something else. It's a quirky element to this movie, and look, this movie and James Gunn are both very quirky, no doubt about it. But honestly, I don't think it really worked. I was trying to watch season 2 of Black Summer on Netflix, a bad-ish zombie show that constantly has title slates breaking everything up, and I kind of got those same vibes here. There's also something amazing knowing that Waller had 2 teams at the Corto Maltese beach, and he used one mainly as a distraction, and that distraction team had her main non-bomb planted in his brain guy, Rick Flag, on it. Her cold-heartedness is shown and not talked about in stellar, subtle fashion, and pretty quickly we see the main squad we know we care about with the other team being decimated in like 12 minutes. Bloodsport, Peacemaker, King Shark, Ratcatcher 2, and surprising as all get, a Polka Dot Man are the main characters here, and we're just waiting for them to reconnect and see what becomes of both Harley and Flag. I may not have mentioned this yet, but the clever nature of having Roker kill a bird in prison to start the movie off and having that same breed of bird eat out of his dead open head at the end is like super good. Mad props, Gunn. There's something fun about seeing a flashback of Elba in prison cleaning and almost getting, disrespected and told off by Davidson for a hot second. Gotta love it. We may never get it, but you gotta wonder if we can ever see and if it ever would work having Deadshot and Bloodsport in the same universe, especially with them both having the father role, even if one is a bit better at being a dad, of the year. Neither one's great, but one's definitely better. There is the loosest of DCEU ties in that introduction to Bloodsport, with Superman existing and being in the ICU because of him and a kryptonite bullet. We don't know which Superman we have these days, but I hope we have Cavill, and that this movie can get that shared universe back on track, and this movie is a really good start to that. I feel like King Shark takes some inspiration that feels right at home with the version of the character from the animated Harley Quinn show, also available on HBO Max if you need more superhero content, which is going to have a season 3 at some point. But early on, the personality meshing of these 5 characters is so much fun, and I really do like John Cena in this movie. He is perfectly cast in the role, and it was billed for him being like douchey Captain America. That's exactly what we got. While we clearly know the main cast and team, there's a really nice moment of Javelin giving his signature weapon to Harley Quinn, and knowing that this is a surprising, huge element that lasts the duration of the movie. We should have known from the marketing materials that she was going to have it because he died. Like, why else would she have this big spear thing? While Will Smith was cool and fun, nothing compares to Bloodsport's like super, super cool weapons and gadgetry. Peacemaker has them too, and it's a rival of sorts, but Bloodsport's is the coolest of all. even like there's cute moments in this movie that you think is so dark, like the rat catcher king shark moments of friendship. They're nice in the same way that, you know, watching king shark eat people is super nice in a very different way. But while, you know, all this is neat, one of the entire movie highlights for me has to be the constant killing and one-upping of Peacemaker and Bloodsport having a killing competition in new brutal ways. The cavalier way that they take out an entire camp is the best kind of over-the-top fun. You knew they were going to be a main part of the film, and this scene is so good, especially with all the killing being like a part of a mistake being all of their eventual allies. The subversion fun never ends. So while I like Peter Capaldi, I'm a bit whatever on his use in this film. I like the Starro elements of using it on, you know, first political prisoners and using it as like a nuclear threat deterrent on an enemy's capital country. Like the political elements shown here are super neat to see in a blood-soaked air quote hero film. And while we all know the biggest bad guy is this starfish, this movie thankfully doesn't rely on that being the only villain. Arguably, the other villains are more there, between the Corto Maltese military folk, the Thinker, Peacemaker, Amanda Waller, and honestly, most of the squad members are pretty bad, excluding 1 to 2 mostly good people. I feel like you gotta say, Rick Flag and Ratcatcher are the mostly good people. I can't really tell with Polka Dot Man, but that's kind of, I guess, my 2 cents on it. I don't know how into all the Corto Maltese stories I am, but the quick Harley romance to killing a guy, mostly based on her personal red flags of him wanting to kill kids, I can't help but think that comes from her Birds of Prey relationship with the younger kid that she's kind of taken under her wing, along with her hyena. Like, she's also become kind of a paternal figure to that kid. And I like that the therapy angle of her character is there when she knows, you know, if she sees a red flag in a partner, the healthy thing to do is kill them. Love this. But gosh, I wish we could have seen Jared Leto's Joker, like, somewhere in the DCU. Like, they did a really good job with that character and that storyline, that relationship in the animated Harley Quinn show. So if they can do it there, like they did it really well there, you'd hope they could do it in live action too. While there is so much good here, and I really like what they did with Polka Dot Man, like they didn't do a lot, but they did a lot that I enjoyed. You know, there's also that Star Labs DCEU reference. The whole thing with, you know, seeing his mom everywhere, it's a bit much. And I'm all about like weird, but him always seeing his mom everywhere at least 3 times, I don't know. That was a little bit too weird for yours truly. I know, there is a first time for everything. I may have talked about some of the odd choice things in the editing ideas, but if there's one really cool idea that I thought is done super well, was seeing Taika Waititi parenting flashbacks with a young Ratcatcher 2, all played out on a bus window, like artistically, super nice, and seeing their connection between, you know, Bloodsport and Ratcatcher 2 of this paternal love or lack thereof. You kind of know these are the main 2 that will most likely make it out alive. I mean, I did go into this assuming one would die to maybe sacrifice himself for the other, something that did not happen. I don't think anyone asked for a party bar scene, but seeing John Cena awkwardly dance and making sure to get the pet rat a drink as well, like super fun. At that moment, I will admit, I kind of assumed the full team in front of us was, you know, they were going to be teammates forever, and, you know, they'd throw Harley Quinn into the mix, and they'd all be a family forever. Man, was I an idiot for getting suckered into that one. Maybe it's because I saw the first Suicide Squad right before this, and the Dom Toretto family stuff has been all over TikTok recently. I feel like there is a bit of a break from right after the final team-up moment to the final battle chaos, but thankfully before that lull, there's this amazing almost rescue that instead gives Harley Quinn some much-needed action moments of taking out a whole bushel of troops with some guns, some with other elements, but thankfully she is reunited with a javelin, and she actually, and it, causes some damage. You know, the CGI flowers are a bit much that don't quite make sense to me, but overall, with her being sidelined from the action for a while, this was super necessary and desired. I want to chalk up the music working better here, pop-wise, being quirkier and a bit more oldies as opposed to random pop and Rick Ross songs. There is more counterpoint music as opposed to modern whatever songs. Once again, I really think the Ayer cut would do so much better. Now, with all the double crossing and bad people stuff, the best, of course, is saved for the end. Well, the best real one. Seeing Rick Flag want to be a good guy, arguably he already is. He wants to expose the truth to America, while Waller once again has a contingency to use the star-spangled asshole to cover up all the data. By any means necessary. It's pretty crazy. This surprise was wild. We all knew that Peacemaker show was going to exist and John Cena was going to be the main character moving forward, but to have him be one of the main villains in this movie, after enjoying him on screen for so long, was a wild shift I did not see coming. And to top it all off, fighting with Rick Flag, someone who he at least some stuff has in common, and he eventually viscerally kills him. I was blown away to say the least. Rick Flag was fine in the first one, but I really expected him to be around for the long haul for any other Suicide Squad movies that may or may not be in the future. But not with a punctured heart, that's for damn sure. And having it all seen by Ratcatcher 2 just to almost be killed off as well, it's a lot. We talked about CGI baddies being a thing, and how that was a huge plague to the first movie. Thankfully, Cena is almost a way worse villain as a real person. That's why, CGI Starfish, which still looks pretty good, isn't as annoying. And I wonder, not to the same level, but if the Joker villain had been a part of that villainy in the first one, taking away from some of the CGI stuff, maybe it would have had a not as strong, but still similar enough effect. Look, thinking of the CGI baddies, let's go back to Justice League. We've seen two different CGI styles for Steppenwolf, between the voice and the design and everything, and just how much better one was. You can make it work. You can have good CGI that doesn't feel so detracting from what you're trying to do. I know King Shark is more of a goof character, and that is super fun, but seeing his ultimate joy with these strange, cute little fish creatures, mad trippy, and I'm all here for it. Even that had a betrayal, as they were trying to eventually eat the beloved King Shark. Now, I did not know I needed an actual fight between Peacemaker and Bloodsport. Heck, I wanted their rivalry to be fun and last forever, and it wasn't really a fight, more of a shootout, but having Bloodsport's bullets actually turn out to be smaller is pretty fun, following up on a joke moment from their first rivalry shootout. And at this point, you really thought the Peacemaker show would be a prequel with, Peacemaker being dead, but turns out through post-credit wonders, this movie is actually going to be the prequel to the Peacemaker show, and he didn't die somehow. Very interesting. There's a part where you thought maybe it could have been Rick Flag living, but like I said, with the Peacemaker show, it's what it is. Apparently Rick Flag is dead. The actual Starro kaiju zombie fight is pretty good. I think the face sticking on part is a little goofy at times. And yes, the squad almost leaves, returning to save the day and having Waller knocked out by her own staff to save them is a little cheesy. But it's still super fun to see the actual fight. This part might be a bit cheesy too, but I enjoyed Bloodsport being a leader in the end, even if almost immediately King Shark and Polka Dot Man are both incapacitated or killed. The Polka Dot Man death was pretty brutal, especially after explaining that he finally became a superhero. The dark humor has got to always be there. How else could that explain, why Harley Quinn and Ratcatcher are the primary reasons for defeating this creature, this monstrosity, Starro? Wild and amazing. The absolute flood of rats with some really nice emotional music, and Harley using the javelin to lance that big old starfish eye to let the rats in is a wild and irreverent end. And even that has some really nice motifs of Outsiders and Taika Waititi getting some strong emotional payoff with Daniela Melchior, a theme that makes sense with the Suicide Squad as a whole, and the end is surprisingly nice and emotional in a movie that is filled with death and gore, not necessarily sad emotional, but it makes you smile a bit. And a Harley swimming through an eye with rats pouring in is another mad, trippy moment that's a visual spectacle to behold. The end isn't a ton. Kind of has the emotional catharsis in a plane flying away from a war movie or a Resident Evil game, but it's a fitting, uplifting enough end. But part of me kind of want to see them in jail again at the end, like the first movie, to ground it a bit. And while not the most important, there is a fun nod to Weasel, who seemingly drowned to death so early on, actually surviving and just running around the beaches of Corto Maltese. But yes, a few odds and ends to nitpick, but overall, a super strong and fun movie that you should really watch. And now comes another fairly obvious ratings list of these two movies with one caveat. So there's going to be no surprise. Number 2, Suicide Squad. Number 1, The Suicide Squad. I think if we're given letterbox ratings, I think The Suicide Squad from 2021 is for sure an 8. Maybe I'm being a little harsh on it, but I think an 8 feels pretty spot on. Or that would be, 4 stars out of 5. It's the whole, I'm not used to the stars as much as I am the out of 10 rating system. And like we said, the original Suicide Squad right now would probably be 2.5 stars. I like to think the Ayer cut could make it a lot closer. It wouldn't surpass it, but I think the Ayer cut, if it's what we think it would be, I feel like I could see it being 3.5 stars. But that's not what we got, so we will sit with what we have until we get what we did. That's the episode. The Suicide Squad was a gleefully bloody romp that you all should watch, regardless of your feelings or knowledge of the DCEU as a whole. And honestly, you really could just watch this movie, not be a part of the other movies in the expanded universe. I think you should, but you don't have to. And yes, I really hope we get that darker Ayer cut that most DCEU fans need. But this second entry was really good. What was your favorite part of the sequel? And what is your take on the Ayer cut? Let me know both on social at knickknackmovies or knickknack_IC on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Letterboxd, where you can check out all of my film star ratings for both and any movie I've seen in the last couple years. So from me to you, cheers, and until next time, cinephiles. Are you not entertained? I think this is gonna be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I don't like goodbyes. Let's just call this see you later, alligator.